Hello and welcome back to the Earth-1218 Watchers podcast. This week's topic is the fandom of the MCU.
That's right. Fandoms give power to the franchise they support, and a sign of a successful franchise is a large fandom. Fandoms keep franchises alive while also influencing which direction they move in, and this is completely true of the MCU.
And this week we have special guests from the Imaginary Worlds podcast here to give their own views of the MCU fandom. Go ahead and introduce yourself, guys.
Hi, my name is Michael Walker.
I'm Luke Crandall.
And I'm Isaac Long.
And with that, let's roll the intro.
Shit, that's so bad.
So guys, we found this article online that kind of breaks down the fandom of the MCU. I'm going to have Giulio read this quote off for you, and then you can tell me where each of you think that you fall within this ranking system.
All right, so I found from Gard, Fauske is his name. He says that we can break down the audience of the MCU into 4 different groups. So we have the core audience, where those, he says, are likely to buy the film and promote it, and have seen most or all of the films in the MCU. There's the niche audience, who are just people who like superheroes, superhero comics, cartoons, comic book movies, stuff like that. There's a secondary audience, who are people that just enjoy the big spectacles, blockbuster movies. And then a tertiary audience, who are people that like all the different genres that some of these films have, so like action, adventure, sci-fi, war films, and like heist films. So kind of curious where you all fall in this breakdown.
Well, I think I probably fall down into the niche audience because I'm a big fan of the DC universe. So
DC. All right, I see how it is. I'd probably categorize myself as probably the first or second. I have seen almost all of the MCU films, except for like the very first couple, like with the Hulk and stuff like that. And then I've seen a lot of DC, like the animated stuff. So kind of fall in both categories there.
So I'd probably call myself a niche because I've seen almost all the movies and I feel like I know more about sort of like the lore and everything than maybe the common viewer, as well as Ziggy mentioned that he liked DC comics, and well, I haven't actually read DC comics. I've read a lot of like I think it's by Vertigo, so like the like Watchmen and Lucifer.
Okay. Yeah. It's MCU is also kind of like a big mainstream thing now too. So I feel like there are a lot of like niche and then the secondary and tertiary audience as well.
Mhm.
Because at least when Endgame was coming around, I felt like the promotion for that movie was big in literally everything on TV. And like there was like a special with some star that was in the movie that was promoting it for every single channel at some point.
Yeah, I definitely think like because it's so mainstream, almost it seems like everyone has to have some opinion about it. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but
Yeah,
definitely. Like at the start when it was just like even in the same article, it even says like at the beginning of like when these films started coming out, the audience was 57% guys that were in between the ages of 25 and 34. So kind of a smaller audience. And then when you hit all of these different films that start bringing in all these different groups of people, like you have like grandmas know Thanos' name now. Like that would have been unheard of for all these other superhero films. So it just shows how much it's grown.
Yeah, it really is crazy how it's gone from like a niche thing. I remember I had a friend back in high school who was super into the MCU, like had read all the comics and everything, and that's back when it was like still becoming mainstream. So it was interesting seeing like the first, you know, kind of primary audience was MCU or Marvel fans, and then now how it's become just everyone.
I think it would be an interesting comparison to that comment about grandmas knowing Thanos' name to how many people even listening to this podcast know who Darkseid is, right? To pull into the DC fandom slightly there.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. Not a lot of people know almost anything about DC. I think that's partially because one, the way the like DC was handled, a lot of the live action, unlike Marvel, are not really looked upon greatly. I'm sure you guys know some DC movies that were live action that just were absolute garbage. But the animated stuff from DC is where like a lot of the people who really like DC, that's the kind of stuff they watch. So I think because Marvel like capitalized so heavily on doing really good live action movies and then also marketed it in a way that almost drew in families, because I definitely argue that Marvel marketed like the Avengers in a very family friendly and like a family movie way. It became so successful because of that.
Yeah, and I can see, especially with the like the animated universe comment, because like the DC animated universe is fantastic and has a lot of really good different like shows and movies and all that kind of stuff. But because it's animated, I feel like the parents look at it and they think of it more of as a child thing, and they don't get invested into it that much. But like you said with the MCU, with it being live action, I feel like that helps bring whole families in to see it and brings a larger like demographic of age wise.
Yeah, for sure. Like the Justice League animated is really, really good, and it could definitely be watched by an entire family. But because it's animated, like you said, I doubt the parents would sit down with their kids to watch it. But to go see a blockbuster film that's live action and it's superhero, you know, I think that would draw in the older crowd as well.
Most definitely. Like, for example, over the summer, because we couldn't go out and do anything, my dad and my mom were like, hey, pick out what your favorite MCU movies are and let's watch them as a family. And it's like, all right, we're going to watch these 5. You know, and like, it's a good example of how the MCU has become a family kind of film rather than the DC is just kind of like an individual kind of niche of kids around our age group, I guess.
Yeah. I think also another good way to look at it is comparing it to like Star Wars, not to get too far off, but Star Wars has all this lore like from Legends and the Clone Wars and all the animated stuff, but the live action movies are very heavily marketed as a family thing. Like for example, I went and watched I think it was episode 9 with my family in theaters. So the way Star Wars has done it is they had 2 very different parts. And despite the Clone Wars series definitely being something that like an older audience would enjoy too, I think just simply because it was animated, it didn't catch on the same way. But that's why their live action stuff catched on so heavily and was so marketable.
Right, and that might just have to do. I mean, people still look at the cartoons are for kids, and nowadays some of these cartoons they're being marketed towards an older audience, but still you have these older people that are thinking, oh, it's animated, it's not for me, so why should I give it the time?
Exactly. Like, I mean, that whole perception of cartoons are for kids has been changing recently, especially with The Simpsons. Itself, it's fairly old now, but like it's a good example of a cartoon that was marketed for adults, and now a bunch of other cartoons have come out, like Family Guy. I think like
Rick and Morty, am I right?
Morty, yeah, like a bunch of other stuff like for adults.
Yeah. I think another thing that the MCU does very well is kind of like has different genres, but it's all in the same kind of universe. Like looking at what is it, Winter Soldier? That's kind of like a spy film, whereas like Guardians of the Galaxy kind of is a comedy. So I think that with the amount of movies they have and the diversity in the genres that they have, also kind of plays a part into appealing to like people of all ages as well, because there's always something that everyone will be interested in among 20 different movies.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good thing that they do, because we've been kind of comparing, DC Extended Universe and Marvel Universe. And with Marvel, it seems like every movie you go to is going to be a different experience. It's not just the same, super basic superhero story over and over again. Whereas with DC movies, it often feels like you're just watching, all the stereotypes of a superhero movie just play out.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is also like a lot of the first movies in the DCEU were like all directed by the same person. So like you don't really get the different feel from each director, because I think it was like all Zack Snyder up till like Justice League, or at least because he directed like half of Justice League, and then they changed it to be the other guy, and then they started having different directors with like Wonder Woman and Aquaman that started to kind of give a different feel to the movies, but it was still kind of all very similar.
Yeah, I mean, also the whole thing with the Jack Snyder directing Justice League and then being kind of kicked out. I don't think he really got kicked out. I think he had to go away because of some sort of cancer issue.
Yeah,
I don't remember exactly what it was. Family issues, as you said. But that definitely hindered the overall work, right? Because you have this one guy leading and kind of giving his directorial input, and then all of a sudden he's gone and removed from the project completely, and they're left with half-finished product.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good example even of how powerful a fandom can be, because now we're getting Zack Snyder's cut of the Justice League movie just because so many fans pushed for it. Like, you had campaigns online asking people to show them the Snyder cut.
Hashtag release the Snyder cut.
Yeah, and like now we're getting it. So like fans have shown that they can be powerful in influencing kind of what they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that. I'm not kept up on the news, I guess, but
that's you're good. It's like HBO, I think they're doing it on.
Oh, is it on HBO now? It's kind of surprised. I thought they'd do it on their app, but okay.
I think it's like HBO Max is gonna have it.
As long as it comes out, I'm excited to see how it turns out. Considering most of the universe was directed by him prior, I'd like to see where his vision leads us into Justice League. So
I think that it potentially could be really, really good for DC as well too, if it shows like, hey, we listen to our fans, and like, especially if the Snyder Cut ends up being great,
Yeah,
for sure.
And who knows? Maybe I think Darkseid is going to be in the Snyder Cut, so people will get to know his name there then.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be interesting.
Yep. Well, thank you guys for coming on our podcast. It was great having you, and thank you for that intro.
Oh, you're welcome. We rehearsed if you couldn't tell.
We rehearsed it quite a bit.
I couldn't tell the difference between the orchestra playing and you guys beatboxing. So
I mean, yeah, it was exactly the same.
Well, it's an improv group. We're trying to do a quick startup,
Oh, gotcha.
All right. Well, it was really nice being on this podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
All right, Giulio. Considering this is the last official podcast for the class, we don't know where this is going. I figured we'd wrap this up using that, like, the fandom is the topic this week. I figured we talk about some of our own experiences within the fandom, because I feel like both of us could classify ourselves as part of that core audience,
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say. I mean, I don't know how many times you've seen all of the movies. I can't. Oh, geez.
I'd say more than the average person for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Same here. Like it's gotten to the point where I know you can quote like all of Iron Man.
I can quote a decent amount of Iron Man, yes.
Yeah. Like we decided to like participate in like one of the things the fandom did before Endgame came out was do a big rewatch of all of the movies, which we participated in. And during the rewatch, like when at the very start, when we started Iron Man, I had to tell you to stop quoting the movie because you were just getting it.
It's not my fault. It's such a good movie.
It was getting a little bit ridiculous with how much you were quoting this movie.
Yeah, the rewatch was a fun time though. Like we organized everything, and we were in the dorms at the time, so every single movie we would put up like a picture from that movie on our whiteboard outside of our room. And then because of the rewatch, people knew that we were doing a rewatch, and like there were like hall events that were organized around it where we would watch. Some people would just come in our room and watch with us, or like I remember the one time our RA got a projector and we watched Ragnarok like in one of the kitchenettes.
Yeah, we had a whole big pizza party
Yeah,
watching the movie. It was a good.
that
I
was
mean, yeah, I
cool.
think that's one of the things the fandom does is it brings people together, and they can
Mhm.
nerd out about the MCU, which is always a fun time.
Yeah, going back to Thor Ragnarok though, I remember that was like one of the first big things that I had like done for a Marvel movie, because that was like our first year here. I don't Were you there for the Ragnarok when we watched it at the mall?
Yeah, that was the time when I slipped on the way back because it was the first snowfall.
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah,
like that was
I'm
our
not
that
gonna
was our
forget that.
first year at Tech, and at that point none of us still had cars, so the only like showing of Thor Ragnarok when it came out was in the mall that's like up past Walmart, and we wanted to go see it. So we all went, got on the Walmart bus, got dropped off at Walmart like around 5:30, and then went to go see Thor Ragnarok. But after like I think 6 o'clock, the buses stopped running to Walmart, so we had
Yeah.
to walk back. And it's like an hour and a half, hour and 15-minute walk. But it was also the first time that we had gotten like a major snowfall that night. So it was a very fun experience, though. I enjoyed it.
Was that also the time when you brought the cookie sheet, or was that Black Panther?
That was Black Panther because I remember Thor Ragnarok. We watched that like I think a week or a week and a half after it came out. So there weren't that many people that were at the theater.
Yeah.
And I remember because I asked the guy that was running the place, I was like, "Hey, I bought some groceries and some stuff like that because I needed to get stuff at Walmart. It's in my backpack and I know I can't take the backpack into the theater. Can I put the backpack behind the desk?" And the guy that was working there for Thor Ragnarok said, "Yeah, no problem." So we watched the movie, we came back out, and he gave me my backpack, and I'm like, "Thank you, have a good day," and then we walked back. And I remember for Black Panther, we went, I think it was the second opening day,
Hmm.
and I did the same thing because I was like, well, they did it before, and I had bought groceries. I bought a baking sheet to try to go sledding on, so I had stuffed it in my backpack. I had stuffed all the groceries in my backpack, and I asked the guy there, and I was like, hey, and keep in mind, like it was really busy at the theater at that time because people had been like camped out to get good seats like 3 hours beforehand with their online tickets,
Hmm.
and they were like, due to the circumstances of today and the amount of people, we can't like have backpacks right now. And I'm like, well, this isn't good because I already bought my ticket and I have a backpack and I don't know what to do. So what we did was, I remember I took my backpack outside because this was in February, so we had a decent amount of snow at the time, and the mall had also like been plowing all the snow into various mounds and hills and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I used the cookie sheet to dig a hole in one of the mounds, and I threw my backpack in there, and then I threw the cookie sheet over the backpack, and then I threw snow over the cookie sheet.
Yeah, I remember you doing this, and I thought, you had a plan. I thought it was but like the extent that fans will go to watch these movies is
Hmm.
extraordinary, and
You
I appreciate your dedication by
don't say
burying
you
your
don't say
backpack.
you think I had a plan, because I had a
You
plan and the
didn't.
plan
You
worked.
didn't. Your plan was to sled down a hill with a cookie sheet. All right, you didn't plan to bury your backpack to watch Black Panther.
It's just how it turns out sometimes.
Again, the fans are passionate about watching these movies to the point where they'll bury their items in snow to
Hmm.
watch them.
And that wasn't even like the first time I was considering doing that, because that was also the
What
year
do you mean
that,
it wasn't the first time?
well, it's like I was prepared to do that again because I
Oh, okay.
remember Infinity War also came out that year,
Yeah.
and we knew we were gonna go see that. We had our tickets ready to go. I remember I camped out for like 2 hours in advance before the movie started to get like good seats,
Mhm.
and I like was like, do I need groceries? Do I want to go through the same pain of burying my backpack again?
Yes.
So I was like weighing my options at that point because I think it was a Friday and I was like low on snacks, and I was like, I could really use some snacks.
I think
But
Infinity War was like the first time that I experienced like remember like watching it and the entire audience was just reacting to everything that was happening on
yeah,
screen.
That was
was
really cool.
it was just like you clapped at the cool moments. Like,
That was like the
spoiler
first
alert, when
time.
people got
Yeah,
dusted, people started like actually crying, which
yeah.
was amazing to see the reactions from all the fans happening in the theater. Like, I don't know, like seeing Infinity War and Endgame opening night with a big crowd like that,
hmm
it's unforgettable.
Endgame, I remember a little bit more just because it was more recent. But I
Yeah.
like remember again, spoiler alert. But like when Cap like picked up the hammer,
Mhm.
I remember literally the entire crowd or like the entire audience in the theater just started clapping and cheering.
Oh, it was nuts. Everyone started going wild. Like, you had to try and pay attention to what was happening on screen because everyone was so, like, they were just freaking out over, oh man, he picked up the hammer, he
hmm
did it. And then
Yeah,
when Iron Man like died, there was I want to say a couple rows behind me, I just saw like a group of people just started bawling their eyes out, and it's
yeah,
just,
I teared up.
yeah, like, it was a sad moment, and it was
hmm
it was fun to experience that with the other people there.
Yeah, and going back to the people with I remember like because Endgame that was another movie that I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to like get there early and get seats for. And I remember there was a kid that was in a high school that was like the person that was right in front of me in line that I was like sitting next to the whole time. I don't even know who he was, but him and I were just chatting the whole time. His mom brought him Taco Bell because he had been sitting in line for like an hour longer than me and was like starving. And
That's
like
wow.
we were also like, what can we do in like this 3 hour period before the movie starts? And I was like, I pulled out my phone. I was like, yo, I got Infinity War on my phone. Do you want to watch it? And he's like, yeah, let's watch it. So we started watching Infinity War before Endgame outside of the theater.
Great preparation for the movie by
Uh-huh.
refreshing, man. That's like another cool thing. Like, you would have never like met this guy or formed that like little relationship there for a second if it wasn't for all of this.
hmm the uniting factor of fandoms is something that's really cool.
You know, speaking of uniting factor, Franklin, have you heard of this? It's only happened past week, I think. Hashtag Save Daredevil.
Oh yeah.
It's when the rights for Daredevil went back from Netflix to Marvel Studios, and fans loved Charlie Cox's adaptation of Daredevil,
I
and
do not blame them.
Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin. So all like the actors have been pushing, and what did you say the petition was now? 420,000 fans have signed a petition to push Marvel Studios into bringing back Daredevil and
Mhm.
having the same actors go at it again.
Yeah. And I'd be completely down to see them go again. It's just that I just Daredevil is one of my favorite shows, and I feel like at least the first season with its like the one action scene where they didn't cut anything. I feel like that had a big influence on like other shows and movies to come because of how popular that scene became, and then it felt like other like movies and shows had to do a similar thing.
Right, like they're just trying to imitate that moment, and the the amount of like just like the cool action and stunts that they do, I think
Mhm.
definitely influenced later properties that were on Netflix and off Netflix.
Mhm.
So I
And
can
even
I
the
can understand why the fandom wants to bring Daredevil back. Like, it'd be real cool to see him fighting with all the other characters on screen.
mhm. I don't know if I'd want to see like the origin story again though, but like if they could find a way to like incorporate the story that has already been told like into the MCU, like I
Mhm.
don't know like if like Netflix owns the rights to that story still, which would kind of make it tough, but like I do want to see like all those actors come back and reprise their roles, but like if they have to like reboot them all in the MCU, it's
Mhm.
gonna be I don't know. I feel like it's gonna kind of lose some of the magic that was in all that storytelling that made the show all so great as well.
I think the problem is if you include the Netflix show, you also have to include all the other Netflix shows,
hmm
because they're all like, after Daredevil season 2, you got Defenders, and that affects where he is in season 3. So you can't really like just say, okay, Daredevil seasons 1 through 3 are canon and then nothing else,
hmm
because then you run into the issue of, okay, well, how did he get to this point in season 3? Why is he referencing all these other characters if they're not actually part of it? So
Yeah.
It might be
Yeah,
better to just make like a movie and reboot it, or just people will just say, okay, we know the story of Daredevil. Let's do what we did with Spider-Man and just jump right into it.
yeah, I feel like that would be a really cool thing to do. But I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing like different, like if they're gonna do that and kind of like do soft reboots of all the characters. I feel like it'd be cool to see them all in the MCU somehow as that.
Yeah, I
'Cause, like
definitely think that
there were
Iron
parts of
Man.
every single show, even Iron Fist, even though that one wasn't the best show, but there were parts of every single show that I enjoyed at some point watching them. So
Right, and I mean, having like you said, a soft reboot, I don't think it would hurt. So we'll have to. It's just the only thing is like how would they incorporate that, and like the direction that they're going doesn't seem like it would be for Daredevil. Like maybe if Daredevil was part of, I don't know, like phases one and two, then it'd be okay. I would think if they're at that point. But now they're working in like multiverse and mutants are coming in and like all this other stuff. So it's like
Mhm.
where would they fit in is I think the problem.
yeah. Plus, with all like the work that they have on them right now, it'd be hard to like include them right now in like one of the current phases. Like they'd have to probably add them later on in like 5 or 6 or whatever.
Yeah, there's like four. You definitely couldn't do four. It's way too packed, and not.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say it even like the themes are gonna be for Daredevil.
Yeah.
I could see season or not season phase 5 because they're bringing in Blade, and that you get more of like the gritty tone happening.
Yeah.
That
Like they
then
could
I could see
definitely
bringing in
include Punisher
Daredevil.
with that.
Yeah, I could see you including Punisher and Daredevil with something like Blade.
Yeah. I think it also we don't know what the repercussions of like what is it, WandaVision are gonna be. Because I remember like you and I were speculating about like about how like the multiverse is gonna change because of that. And maybe they'll just be like, hey, these shows are now canon.
I mean, I think what more is going to happen because I read something recently saying that WandaVision pulls heavy inspiration from the House of M comics.
Yeah.
So that in those comics, Scarlet Witch made it so that there were no more mutants, but there aren't any mutants right now in the MCU, so she could just like flip it on its head and bring them all in.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe Thanos has snapped it. Like who knows what's gonna bring him in at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got very off topic from Daredevil there, but not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Just speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess another big thing that the fandom has done in terms of coming together, I would say, is the Black Widow movie that's going to be coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think
Fans have been like begging for years. Be like,
she started
hey,
out in Iron Man 2, which was 2010. So 10 years
yeah,
ago, she was introduced into the MCU, and
uh-huh.
pretty much I want to say probably since like Avengers time, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing all of the Avengers get their own solo films, I guess except for Hawkeye and her,
Mm-hmm.
like give her own like spy film would be, I guess, the theme there because that's what she is.
Mm-hmm.
So
And I
I
mean,
mean, yeah,
Black Widow was supposed to come out in theaters over the summer, but it's I don't
I
know.
mean, COVID ruined all the movie release, so it's like whatever.
Everything gets pushed back.
But I
But
mean, I think the fans were a big part in getting this movie made. Like,
mm-hmm.
if you didn't have such an outcry from the fan base about we want a Black Widow movie, give her own movie, blah blah blah, like you wouldn't be seeing, you'd be seeing some other movie fill the spot at this point.
Probably.
So I think it's really cool how fans can push for, like we talked about earlier with the Snyder cut. They also can push for the Black Widow movie.
How they influence like the studios that they support.
Right, and I mean, of course, the core fans are definitely a smaller base than the general audience that's going to go see these movies. But
Mm-hmm.
I think they're important in how they're going to be perceived, because if you have a bunch of like angry nerds online screaming about how this movie's bad, like
Mm-hmm.
people aren't going to really go see it. Yeah, you're going to have your audiences like, oh, cool, let's go see the next like Marvel movie or whatever. But over time, I think it's going to be bad. So it's good that they're somewhat listening to what the fans want.
For sure. Well, I think that we've dragged on long enough. It's kind of weird thinking that this is the last podcast, at least officially. We don't know what we're gonna do in the future.
Right. I mean,
But
I think we had a good run
oh
for,
yeah,
for this class. I'm happy to have done this with you, Franklin.
oh yeah. It's sad we couldn't get a sponsor for this episode. We had to cut Phobos because of his catnip
Catnip
problems.
issue,
So
yeah. I mean, and
we wish
he's
him the best in rehab.
exactly. I mean, his owner's going through a lot, trying to push him to rehab. But I mean, we'll have to see what happens with him. Hopefully, in the future, he'll be
Back
better.
to his fluffy self.
Exactly.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.